The Taliban has marked 100 days since taking over Afghanistan. It has promised peace and security. But on the ground, there are warnings of a country on the brink of both a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Unrecognized by any nation as a legitimate government, the Taliban-led Afghanistan has been cut off from the rest of the world. Humanitarian aid has largely ceased, and the country's foreign exchange reserves are frozen. The United Nations estimates that Afghanistan's banks might collapse within 6 months. Now, at the same time, the social cost is mounting. 90% of the population is expected to be in poverty by early next year. 23 million people, that's more than half the country, is also facing acute food insecurity. Dr. James Dorsey, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore, joins us live now for more on this story. Dr. Dorsey, as they took over, the Taliban said that they were working to establish this inclusive government, one that represented the people of Afghanistan, that they wanted to live peacefully. But it appears to be a government of the old guard. What are the most significant changes that they've implemented so far to you?
Well, I think that, first of all, that they had their own definition of inclusivity, and that was a very different definition from what the rest of the world had. The two areas where I think one sees the most immediate impact of the Taliban government is obviously the status and the conditions for women, and the other is the impact of the deteriorating economic and humanitarian situation. You also have, of course, much more, in some ways, more outside of Kabul, the increase, as the reports go, of the opium trade, particularly because the farmers aren't able to export their other crops, and this is the only way that they can make ends meet. And you're also seeing the concerns that minorities, particularly the Hazara Shiites, have.
Dr. Dorsey, there may be different conceptions of what inclusivity might be, but where we can make some fair comparison, if we look at the press conference in August, on the 17th of August, the Taliban spokesperson saying, there is a huge difference between us in comparison to us 20 years ago. Now, in this 100 days, how would you weigh up the fact, have they met this promise, particularly on what you mentioned earlier, what the West is certainly looking at, rights for women?
They certainly have not met it in terms of what the international community's expectations were. I think one difference between 25 years ago and today is they've gotten a better grip on communication, but that is only worth that much unless you can back it up with deeds, and they have not been able to back it up with deeds. I think one of the issues that we are seeing is that the Taliban may be less unified than we assume they are. So there are those parts of the Taliban, for example, those that have negotiated in Doha, in Qatar, and therefore have been exposed for a period of time to the outside world, whereas the vast majority of Taliban have not been exposed to the outside world, which raises the question to what degree the Taliban are able to enforce, or certain groups within the Taliban are able to enforce what they envision throughout the rank and file of the movement throughout the country.
Dr. Dorsey, the Taliban doesn't have the experience or the funding to be able to deliver sophisticated government services, but the country is in dire need now. They need to be able to trade like any other country to survive. Where will the tipping point be, and how much longer until the country's economy perhaps collapses?
To be fair, I mean, the Taliban indeed, and I've watched this, for example, with the African National Congress in South Africa, with the Palestine Liberation Organization in Palestine, that transition from a guerrilla movement to a regular government is a very difficult transition, and some movements are better at it than others, and clearly the Taliban is not very good at it. I think what we're going to see is an increasingly deteriorating situation, whereby probably, on the one hand, funds from the international community, whether it's the World Bank, the United States, may remain frozen, but other countries, and certainly neighboring countries in varying ways, are going to step in, certainly with humanitarian help, because they don't want to see a collapse of Afghanistan. And I think that we may also see that in different ways from donor countries in the West, for example.
Well, Dr. Dorsey, I'll pick up on that point. You mentioned neighboring countries. For example, Uzbekistan has been urging an unfreezing of assets, a return of funding from the IMF and the World Bank. And of course, most importantly, we're all looking at China. China is urging more communication and cooperation with the Taliban, although China itself has not officially recognized the Taliban. How likely is any other country going to be heeding these calls and unfreezing assets or restarting funding?
Well, primarily that is a call to the United States, because that's where some $9 or $10 billion of Afghanistan money are frozen since the Taliban takeover of Kabul. I don't think that we're going to see a release of that money to the Taliban. And again, I think the Chinese are very careful in terms of ensuring that they are in line with what others in the international community are thinking. If anything, would want the Russians to go first in terms of any recognition of Afghanistan. And I don't think the Russians are that keen to do it. But at the same time, I think we will see efforts to try and work around or trying to ensure that humanitarian aid that Afghanistan badly needs can be offered in ways that you can ensure that it goes to those who need it and is not used to prop up the Taliban.
Dr. Dorsey, thank you for joining us this evening and for your perspectives. Dr. James Dorsey, there, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute at NUS.
Thank you.